This lecture will cover property research compilation. This is where we'll put together the research that we gathered in the previous module. So let's refer back to the state board rules again, particularly 180-7-.021A. And we covered the top part up here as far as what we needed to gather. Let's look at the two highlighted areas here. The land surveyor shall compare and analyze all of the data obtained and make the most nearly correct legal determination possible of the position of the boundaries of such parcel. It shall be the responsibility of the land surveyor to evaluate conformity with adjacent tracts for overlaps and gores and to report the same on all maps, plats, and reports. So this second highlighted part applies both to the compilation, the stage we're in now, and the analysis after the field survey is done. So simply put, the gathered research is now to be compared and analyzed with a purpose. The purpose is to make the most nearly correct legal determination of the boundaries to be surveyed. This process results in what we call the predetermined analysis. Note that this step is prior to making the field survey. This is because without adequate research and a predetermined analysis, the surveyor is left without the very crucial data needed to make proper decisions in the field or to make an adequate field survey. So all of this data is required to be obtained and analyzed and compared prerequisite to the field survey being made. Here's another state board rule that's important. We go over to, we're trying to think 2 steps ahead, always, in land surveying and in life. And we know that our end product is our plat, our survey, our work product. And so there's a direct reference in the board rules to this, the rule that we just viewed, 180-7-.021A, and that is something that is required to be on all maps and plats, which is the names of adjacent property owners on all lines, along with a notation as to what documents were reviewed for each adjacent property as required by this rule 180-7-021A. Such notation may be the deed book and page of the record title description, recorded plats, and other documents or surveys that were obtained through the course of the survey. So if you got an unrecorded plat from an adjacent owner or the tax assessor's office or a private repository or from in-house records from your company, these are things that if you use them in making your analysis, then you should list them so that yourself and others later on can know what you used to make your decision. It's also notable that if it's a recorded subdivision plat, then the name, the phase, and the recording information is all that's really necessary. If it's simply lot 17 of an adjacent subdivision, you don't have to put now formerly John Doe, deed book such and such. The plat recording information is adequate. And the industry also want to make sure this was added into the board rule. A title search is not required for this. So in other words, some may think that this exercise requires the land surveyor to do a title search. No, we're doing just surveyor research as was discussed in the last module for the purpose of establishing boundaries and easements and encumbrances over a piece of property. And many things within a title search that we are not worried about. So all of this research and compilation winds up being reported clearly on our finished work product, the plat. So we're going to make the predetermined analysis. A survey, like a legal description, is a journey. All journeys have to start somewhere. And although any point on the property boundary can be a starting point, it's usually beneficial to start at the subject property's point of beginning. Sometimes the subject property point of beginning may be in question, it may be obscure. So we want to be thinking ahead, thinking about the field survey. And if it's an obscure point way back in the woods, but yet we can start at a common driveway on a state highway, then that may be where you start, because that's a more logical place for the crew to start. It's important to understand and keep in mind the legal connection to the subject property's vesting deeds point of commencement or point of beginning, which has to be addressed and incorporated into the survey, but it doesn't have to be the very first place that we physically start. And so our predetermined analysis needs to start, at least its focus, where we're going to start our field survey. And that's usually at the point of beginning, but can be somewhere else. So what we're doing is we're going to, the boundary of our subject property should be analyzed then line by line. Refer back to the last sentence of the board rule. Each line should be compared and analyzed with the adjacent property. So often, but not always, gores and overlaps may be apparent as early as the initial research compilation. And of course, any differences should be noted and incorporated into the analysis for the field crew to be made aware of. I want to talk a minute about a very poor practice that is used too often, hopefully not most of the time, but fairly often, and that's to where adjacent deeds and plats are just pulled and thrown into a pile, thrown into a folder, either a paper folder or a computer folder, and given to a field crew to just go survey. Now, this is assuming that there is a separation between the office staff and the field staff, which is the most common way that things are set up. I'll also point out that in my company, we have found it to be far more efficient and produce a better work product for there to be not that distinction between office or field, but most people are a combination of both. It's a lot more efficient if the technician or surveyor that's doing the research and the compilation is also doing the field survey, processing the data, and making the initial boundary determinations and connecting up the improvements and that sort of thing. That's a different discussion, but we will look at it as being a segregated step in staffing and assignments. And it also helps to understand it better, whether if you're the person that's going to be using this in the field or whether if it's someone totally different. So this practice of just throwing everything together and handing it to a crew flies in the face of the board rule, for one thing, because we're to make a predetermined analysis. It's a state board rule. It's not an option. It is good practice, but it's not optional. So understand that one person who's working in an office environment usually has the time to properly analyze all this data. And if there's a problem, they can, at that point, you can say, well, I need to go back to the courthouse, or I need my supervisor to look at this more closely, or I think there's another piece that we're missing. You can also step back and have the time to more fully analyze an adjacent description. These things they're not practical, and they're not very appetizing when you're standing out in the middle of the woods or in the middle of an open parking lot trying to do a survey. So it's just a lot more efficient, and it creates a much better work product to just go ahead and do all this in the office before the field crew gets it. Our work product, which we'll talk about in a minute as the field pack, should be very efficient, very smooth, very simple, very easy to follow, and should be very thorough. So an adequate predetermined analysis can be simple as copies of the research with some handwritten notes and graphics, like we looked at in the legal description analysis section, or depending on the data and the capabilities that, and in a professional work setting, you will have these capabilities. You as students may not. But often we'll take this data and we'll compile it into a CAD file, and then we'll create an ASCII file, which is a tabular data file of point numbers to create a unique identification process, northing and easting coordinates, and usually a description. And then this can be used in field software to go make better use and analysis of the field data. So it can be a big plus to the field crew, but it's also no substitute for properly analyzing and recovering evidence in the field. So we don't want this, this gift of a CAD file and an ASCII file where everything's been thought out very well and prepared for the field crew to mean that they just use it as connect the dots and they go out there and just go from one point to the other. There's still a mandatory requirement to analyze the boundary along the property lines, any evidence, possession, those sort of things. That cannot be ignored just because we've made their job easier. Here are some pointers for the predetermined analysis. And I'll say, as you'll hear again a time or two, that there is no just cookbook, there is no one size fits all. This is unique. It's really hard to get it wrong if you fully delve into it. Your format, your notes, how you compile it is going to be very unique. It's going to be as unique as a fingerprint. Each property is as unique as a fingerprint, and each person's process, which is refined and created, such as in this class, and as you gain skills and begin to use it in the workplace, it's going to be very unique. So that's okay as long as it produces the correct thought process, which means we should always think critically and then question everything. Don't assume anything, but also have an open mind that almost anything is possible. So here are some pointers. First, the subject property's vesting description is the framework from which the analysis is hung, just like the trunk and limbs of a Christmas tree. You can't hang the ornaments, can't hang the garland or the lights until you have the tree up. That's what we work off of. Understand that off-site measurements are often needed to confirm the commonality of boundaries with adjacent properties. In other words, they need to be a common boundary, otherwise it's a gore or an overlap. And sometimes just finding and locating 2 iron pins on the ground is not enough to do that. Sometimes we'll need to go survey up into the adjoiner's property to locate other monuments to confirm that in fact there is no gore or overlap. Third, each line of a survey is to be surveyed the same way regardless of who the client is. Land surveyors are licensed by the state to protect the public, not the profession, not just your client. Adjacent owners have rights and legal standing like anybody else, and they can have legal standing against someone surveying the adjacent tract if you mess it up. So, put another way, the line surveyed should always look the same regardless of which tract is being surveyed. So we have to take all this into account. We don't advocate for our client. We don't advocate for the neighbor if they hire us. We advocate for the line to be correct. The line is the innocent party in all this, and it's our job to accurately and precisely locate it. Be mindful of junior and senior rights, especially when conflicting calls are detected. So if you've got a gore or an overlap, we'll talk more in the analysis about how that often can be a figment of paper imagination, because if there's a senior right, there may not be an overlap. It may be that part of the senior property was accidentally described in a subsequent conveyance. Also, pay special attention to the meridian or north orientation that's used for each adjacent description, and realize that rotations are going to be part of the analysis. In other words, the same line can have 2 totally different bearings. If one is rotated, if one's meridian or north orientation is rotated to a pocket compass in 1985, and the other one is rotated to state plane by GPS observations in 2024. They can be the same line, they're just oriented differently. That's something we'll cover more. Consider that the field crew is going to be using this to conduct the best survey possible, so make it legible and easy to understand, especially any instructions necessary for questionable or conflicting areas. Make sure that it's clear that the field crew understands what they need to locate, and if possible, why they need to locate it. Copies of prior surveys, when they're available, can be extremely helpful in the field. They can show streams, fences, improvements, buildings, and other things that can help the crew orient themselves to the boundaries on the ground. Lastly, be organized. The predetermined analysis will eventually become part of your permanent file. It'll be retained or preserved even after the survey is completed. If questions arise in the future, there will be tremendous benefit to a concise and clear predetermined analysis. Lastly, we're going to put all this together in what I call the field pack. The predetermined analysis is basically an intellectual property. It's a thought process and a gathering and analysis of research. So it's not a physical, tangible thing. It's intellectual property, actually. What we most commonly associate with, or what is perceived as being the predetermined analysis, is the physical material that's handed to the field crew to go use on the ground. I call this a field pack because it is a pack of information to be used in the field. A good field pack will typically start with a map overview, usually a copy of the tax map with some adjoiner information. The next thing is usually going to be the subject property, whether it's a legal description, an expansion, or an enlarged version of the plat. It may be a legal description that's been sketched out, it may have some notes, and then you'll have the adjacent owner information after that. And usually the order that it's stacked is consistent with how you analyze the boundary when you're making your predetermined analysis, one line at a time, typically going clockwise from your point of beginning. And again, here, your field pack is where you think the field should start, not necessarily where the record POB is. Like I said, if the record POB is a landlocked corner 800 feet back in the woods, you're probably not going to go stumble into the woods and hoping to find it. That's not going to work very well. But say your northeast corner is the center of a common drive between two doctor's offices near Kennestone Hospital. There's probably a mag nail or a nail and washer or a PK nail that you can walk up to pretty easily and find. That may be a great place to start the field survey. Then you'll wind up being able to more accurately and efficiently find that landlocked corner 800 feet back in the woods. So this way, the journey is in logical order for efficient field surveying. And depending on the size of the property and if an ASCII file is created, then you're going to provide them with a copy of the worksheet and this ASCII file that's going to be electronically transmitted to the crew. Ideally, this field pack comes back to the office with notes and observations. You know, this corner is number 77, or hey, found 3 pins at this corner. We'll talk later about pin farming. It is ignorant and despicable practice, but some surveyors, we touched on earlier, don't do proper measurement analysis and legal analysis, and will go set a pin all over a pin that should be held instead. And so these are things that the crew can note on their field pack that you usually will flip through as you analyze the field data. And this becomes part of the field notes, the permanent record of the survey. So traditionally, field packs have been paper copies, usually stapled together or bound together like we talked about. But increasingly, even in my business, we will create them as a multi-page PDF and upload them to the cloud, and the crew can download them and use them on their tablets. And so it's hard to lose, a little bit harder to lose a tablet strapped around your neck than a pack of paper. Trust me, I've lost lots of field packs in the woods and had to go back and look for them. But anyway, this is a general overview. This is a complex project or process that is not easily described in minute detail. It's better taught through examples. So we're going to study 2 examples. The first example we will pack a lot into as far as how to find tax assessor data, how to find deed data, and it will be a simple piece of property with a couple of common pitfalls. The second example will be a larger piece of property that will do more of analyzing and incorporating the legal descriptions, such as what we did in the last module. And hopefully through these 2 examples, you'll understand how the process works, and you'll be able to duplicate this in this module's assignment. Thank you and happy surveying.